Hello everyone, and welcome to Natural Grocer's Nutrition Education presentation. We are so pleased today to introduce Carina Toledo with New Chapter. Carina is the National Educator for New Chapter. She is also a certified nutrition counselor and master herbalist. Carina is presenting today on Healthy Bones, Healthy You. Please welcome Carina.
Excellent. Thank you for tuning in today. We are going to talk about Beyond Bone Health in a segment we're calling Building Your Best You. Because when we're talking about bone health, this is our structure, right? So we really have to build it up. And this is important because when you look at the data, osteoporosis and osteopenia are serious health conditions in the United States. Osteoporosis affects 10 million Americans over the age of 50, with nearly 30 million more at risk. And heads up, when you turn 65, it's even more dire. Osteoporosis affects 1 in 4 women over the age of 65 and 1 in 20 men. So what exactly is osteoporosis? So it is characterized by weak and brittle bones that are prone to breaks and fractures because bone mineral density is severely impacted. Osteopenia, on the other hand, is considered a risk factor for osteoporosis because bone mineral density is lower than normal. And you can see here the images on the left, osteoporotic bone, is very weak and brittle. So what's really happening? Why is our bone health so compromised? Well, calcium is the most abundant mineral in our bodies, and it's critical to the health of our entire skeletal structure. Our bones and our teeth serve as storage houses for our calcium. About 99% of calcium is stored in our bones and teeth, with about 1% in our blood. But keep in mind that calcium is needed for much more than bone health. It's actually essential for things like nerve transmission, muscle contraction. We need calcium for proper blood clotting, to regulate our blood pressure, to activate different enzymes in the body, to support our hormone balance. Even regulating a normal heartbeat, we need calcium for that. So what happens when we're not getting enough calcium from our diet? So here's the thing, we need to maintain this constant level of calcium in the blood. It's known as homeostasis or balance. And in order to maintain this level, we need to get enough calcium from the food that we eat. And when we don't, calcium is stolen from our bones in order to maintain this balance. So how many of us are really getting enough calcium from our food? And unfortunately, most all of us are not getting enough calcium from our diet. So the American Bone Health Association has estimated that about 75% of Americans, so 3 out of 4 of us, are not getting adequate calcium from our diet alone. And there's a couple different reasons for this. So one big thing really is soil depletion. The truth is that our soil is not as nutrient dense as it once was. So even if you're eating a really quality diet, the amount of calcium that you're getting from your food is much less than the same amount of food, say 50 or 100 years ago. So a Kushi Institute analysis of nutrient data from 1975 to 1997 found that calcium levels had dropped about 27% in 12 different vegetables. So if you're relying on calcium from your vegetables, this is a real big issue. You're not getting enough. Other factors that we have to consider are, what are you eating, your diet? And there's different dietary risk factors that put us at risk for fractures. Specifically, if you're vegan, a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that vegans have about a 10% higher risk of bone fracture compared to non-vegetarians. And certainly part of this might be the lack of dairy, but there's also concerns that plant-based diets are really high in different anti-nutrients. So these compounds that are found in certain foods can inhibit the absorption and utilization of different minerals. So oxalic acid is found in different vegetables, and phytic acid is found in a lot of beans and legumes, and these can really interfere with the absorption of calcium. And so just keeping this in mind, most of us are not necessarily getting adequate amounts from our food alone. Something else that we call the digestion tax at New Chapter is really that you might not be absorbing all of the calcium from your food either. So depending on how strong your digestion is, there's going to be some of the milligrams that are lost from your food. So to put this in perspective, about a serving of spinach, we'll say 1 cup, has about 30 milligrams of calcium. But what you actually absorb from that is only about 12 milligrams. Interestingly enough, milk, which is actually much higher in calcium milligrams, isn't necessarily the solution either, because 1 cup of whole milk has 276 milligrams of calcium, but what you actually absorb is only about 89 milligrams. So you'd have to drink about 10 glasses of milk to really meet your daily allowance of calcium intake. And interestingly, a study published in 1997, it was a 12-year study, found that they evaluated 78,000 women, and they found that women that drank milk 3 times a day actually broke more bones than women who rarely drank milk. And then keep in mind that 68% of the world's population has issues with breaking down lactose properly, which is the enzyme in milk. Lactose malabsorption is very common, so milk is really just not a solution for many people around the world. So who really needs calcium? Well, everybody needs calcium, we all do, but women are absolutely at the greatest risk. And a big part of this is certainly during menopause, women actually are estimated to lose up to 20% of their bone density following menopause. And that's a huge number. And this is because of this direct relationship between the lack of estrogen after menopause and this increase in bone loss. So basically, if you think about it as like a seesaw, the body is building bone and breaking it down constantly. And after menopause, the breakdown of bone actually outpaces how efficiently we're able to build new bone. And of course, if you have menstrual periods absent at any point in time, or if you have low hormone levels, these all could cause a loss of bone mass. Long before menopause, however, women are at risk also if you're breastfeeding. Breastfeeding moms are estimated to lose 3 to 5% of their bone mass during breastfeeding. So the good news is that we can actually recover it after weaning, which is really important. There are solutions, right? And I know that women are usually targeted for calcium supplementation, but we really need to highlight that men are also at risk for bone loss and osteoporosis. Men's bone health really matters also. Some of these statistics from the National Osteoporosis Foundation were shocking to me. For example, men are really concerned about prostate cancer in today's day and age, but in fact, men older than 50 are actually more likely to break a bone because of bone loss than they are to even get prostate cancer. So this is something that men really should be concerned about. Up to 1 in 4 men over the age of 50 will break a bone due to weakening with age. Today, 2 million men already have osteoporosis and 12 million more are at risk. Every year, about 80,000 men will break a hip. And scarily enough, men are actually more likely to die within 1 year of breaking a hip versus women because of complications related to that break. So again, everybody needs calcium, and a lot of these numbers are really scary, and so it's important to ask the question of, where does this begin? Where does our bone health really begin? And adolescence is the answer to that. So losing bone mass is actually a natural part of aging, which is why it's so important that we focus on our bone density throughout our lives. So when we talked about that seesaw analogy earlier of, your body's breaking down bone and rebuilding it, well, it's natural to start breaking down bone faster than we rebuild it after about the age of 30, right? Which is really young. So both men and women start losing bone density at around the age of 30, which is why it is so important that we have adequate calcium consumption throughout our life, but especially during adolescence, because the foundation of our bone mass is built at this time, and that really determines the bone mass for the rest of our lives. A lot of people don't realize, but adolescents actually have the highest calcium daily allowance of any other age group at 1,300 milligrams. Second to that is menopausal women at 1,200 milligrams. Unfortunately, most of the data really shows that both boys and girls, however, in this adolescent range, are not getting enough calcium from their diet alone. And poor bone health during adolescence is linked to severe consequences later on in life. So supplementation makes sense for a lot of people, right? We're not getting enough calcium in our diets. A lot of it is lost during our digestion. Many of us weren't thinking about bone density during adolescence, and so now we're looking to supplement. But unfortunately, there's a lot of emerging research that calcium can carry some pretty heavy risks when it comes to the heart, to our cardiovascular system. So to quote a study that was published in the New York Times back in 2015, there are several large credible studies that have emerged indicating a higher incidence of heart attacks in both men and women who take calcium supplements. That's pretty scary. A study published or sponsored by the National Institute of Health found that men taking just 1,000 milligrams were 20% more likely to get heart disease than those who didn't take calcium supplements. But overall, the intake associated with this adverse outcomes was just 1,200 milligrams a day, which is what many of us are supplementing with. So it's not huge megadoses that can potentially cause some side effects. A 10-year study called the MESA study found that total calcium intake, when you look at food, was actually associated with a decreased risk of something called atherosclerosis, which is basically hardening of the arteries, whereas calcium supplement use actually increased this risk. And so what we're learning is that when you have this large dose of calcium supplement in the body, it can be too much too fast. And so if the body can't use that calcium or direct it to the bones, it potentially is laying down in the heart, in the arteries, and building up as plaque. And this is actually overcome when we get calcium from food because it's a responsible dosage and it's absorbed at slower rates because of a lot of the cofactors delivered with food. So when we're looking at the forms of calcium that are being studied for potential adverse outcomes, we have to realize that most of the calcium supplements out there are actually derived from rock. And this might come as a surprise for some of you. It certainly did for me, when I first got into the industry, that rock forms of calcium derived from limestone, which is essentially the same as Crayola chalk, these are still the most commonly available. And the reason for this is because they have high amounts of elemental calcium, which is the usable calcium in a given form. And so calcium carbonate, for example, has about a 40% usable amount of calcium, but it comes from limestone. Calcium citrate, a little bit lower than that at 21%, but it still comes from limestone. The benefit of, say, a citrate form is that it's bound to citric acid. So for elderly people or people that have lower stomach acid, it can actually help with absorption. But the truth is these forms can still build up in the body and be really hard to digest and break down. And just from a holistic point of view, I don't think that our body is trained to eat rocks, right? It's kind of counterintuitive. Keep in mind, there are other forms of calcium available. There's actually calcium carbonate that you can get from different marine algae that's been harvested from the ocean floor. So we'll touch upon that. And then one last form that's commonly available is called hydroxyapatite. Sometimes you'll see it listed as HA or microcrystalline hydroxyapatite. This form of calcium does have a higher elemental, but keep in mind it's sourced from ground up animal bones, specifically calf or cow bone. So it's just not, an appropriate choice for a lot of people, especially if you're vegan or vegetarian. So not all forms of calcium are created alike. There is a difference. And this images here you're seeing, these are electron microscopic images. So they're really high magnification of a couple different forms of calcium. So on the left here is limestone calcium, which is this rock form of calcium, which kind of has this flat, very basic architecture. And it doesn't have the bone supportive nutrients that a whole food calcium from, say, algae does. And if you look here on the right, this is a red marine algae sourced calcium. And it's complex and porous looking. It has this intricate matrix of minerals. There's actually over 70 different naturally occurring trace minerals in this red mineral algae. And it's really got this unique, kind of beautiful honeycomb-like structure, right? So when you are looking at calcium in the marketplace, I think it's important to be asking, where is it coming from? Is it coming from a rock? Is it coming from a plant? And then also asking the question about what cofactors are delivered in that calcium. Because the truth is, many of us are not getting enough of some of these essential nutrients that help calcium absorb and also help to build strong bones. One of these in particular is vitamin D3, which is often called the sunshine vitamin, and we'll cover why. But interestingly, 42% of US adults actually have vitamin D deficiency. It's now recognized as a pandemic. And so if we're not getting enough in our diets or from the sun, then essentially we can see a significant impact on our bones and our bone health. So recent survey results have found that over 94% of the population is not eating enough vitamin D, which means we need to get enough sunshine in order to make vitamin D3. Here's what's really unique is that we can actually manufacture D3 from exposure to the sun. So there's actually different receptors on our skin that through a chain of reactions can convert cholesterol in the skin to produce vitamin D3 with exposure to UVB radiation. And many of us are out in the sunshine and we think we're getting enough, but if you wear sunscreen, chances are you're not. So one study actually found that an SPF of as little as 15 can block your body's ability to manufacture D3 as much as 99%. So if you're wearing sunscreen, chances are you're not getting enough D3, which is why many health practitioners are really promoting D3 supplementation for bone health and beyond. Another really important cofactor that isn't talked about as much is vitamin K2. And K2 is really like a guide for your calcium. It helps to activate a couple different proteins in the body that shuttle calcium to the bones where you need it. So specifically, K2 plays a role in calcium absorption by activating MGP protein and osteocalcin, which help to build and maintain bone. The problem is that most of us are not getting enough vitamin K2. So a lot of studies have shown that vitamin K deficiency or insufficiency has been noted in about 97% of older adults. So K1 you can get from leafy greens, but K2 is harder to come by in our diets. So it's actually synthesized mostly by bacteria, which is why you actually find it in our own guts. It's made by our own gut bacteria. But it's also found predominantly in fermented foods because it's made by bacteria. So common sources are natto, which is a form of fermented soybean, sauerkraut, different cheeses like Gouda can have K2, but many of these, especially fermented foods, are really uncommon in the Western diet, right? Most of us are not getting enough. And yet there's been a correlation found between how much K2 we eat and our risk of developing coronary heart disease. So a study published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2004 suggests that getting enough K2, known as menaquinone, is really important for coronary heart disease prevention. Vitamin K has a positive effect on bone mineral density and can decrease our risk of fractures, but typical intakes of vitamin K really fall far below the levels that are associated with this bone mineral density improvement and reduced fracture risk. So therefore, supplementation really makes sense for a lot of us, and you should look for a calcium formula that includes that K2. So we highlighted a little bit earlier about different forms of calcium, and so I just want to circle back because there are many different plant calciums available. And in terms of algae calciums, you're going to see a growing amount of algae calcium on the shelf as well, because the truth is it's a recipe. It delivers a more bioavailable form of calcium than a limestone form. But there are over 6,500 types of red algae in the world, so there's a lot of choices, right? New Chapter carefully selected wild-crafted UTHOTHAMNION sourced from pristine Icelandic waters because it really represents an incredibly pure source. It's very potent. It has a high amount of calcium per milligram. It also is sustainably sourced and it's backed by clinical research. So this particular algae, and you can see it here pictured on the right, delivers a responsible food dosage of calcium with over 70 different naturally occurring trace minerals. It's really nature's recipe for absorbable calcium. It's certified sustainable by the agency Tune in Iceland. It's also going to be, it is currently certified organic. You're going to see that rolling out on labels shortly. And above all, it's clinically researched. So it's supported by science for both bone and joint health. And it's been found to support movement, mobility, and even joint flexibility. So a lot of people are looking for, of course, bone health, but many of us are dealing with inflammation, and we also want support for our joints as well. And this algae really delivers. So a lot of people taking glucosamine, for example, to help with cartilage in the joints, might be excited to learn that this particular source of algae has actually been found to be a holistic alternative to glucosamine and can be taken instead of or in addition to for joint health. So as I said, there's 6,500 types of red algae. So, your source really does make a difference. And the reason why New Chapter chose UTHOTHAMNION algae from Iceland is because of its purity and sustainability, science, and more. But it's really important to recognize that algae plays a role in our environment. So marine algae actually produces 70 to 80% of all oxygen in our atmosphere. So we want to make sure that we're really sustainably harvesting this algae, because if we over-harvest it, then it can actually deplete oxygen supplies in the ecosystem. And this can also lead to depletion of fish stocks that depend on algae for their environment, for their ecosystem. Unfortunately, a lot of the data is showing that the fishing practices worldwide are impacting the health of our oceans, and scientists have estimated that all of the world's fisheries will collapse by the year 2048 unless we change our habits today. So sustainability is really important to New Chapter. But also where your algae grows is important, because algae actually absorbs both nutrients and contaminants from the water where it grows. So Iceland has been a leader in environmental stewardship around the globe. Icelandic waters are some of the purest in the world, but there are many other commercial algae products that are coming from areas such as Brazil. And if any of you watched the Summer Olympics back in 2016, you might have heard about superbacteria that were found off the coast of Brazil in Guanabara Bay. And this is actually very close to where the harvest area is for many other commercial algae products. So we really want to make sure that we're honoring purity when it comes to where we're sourcing our products from. And New Chapter's commitment is and has always been to support both people and planet. We are a certified B Corporation, so this is consistent throughout our entire line, but certainly when it comes to harvesting things from the ocean, this is incredibly important, right? And recently we obtained organic certification on our algae, but it's always been grown organically and certified sustainable by the agency Tune in Iceland. So they ensure that there's no bycatch. So bycatch is the innocent fish and different ocean species that are often caught by commercial fishing industries and killed. So there's no bycatch with harvesting of our algae. There's also no over-harvesting, because every area is meticulously mapped and there's no disruption to our fragile oceans. So again, there are other organic algae on the market, but asking if they're sustainable is that next step, because organic does not automatically mean that it's sustainable. So we are proud to source from Iceland, where actually many different endangered species of birds, for example, the Atlantic puffin, the razorbill, and the northern fulmar, all call home to this area. And our wildcrafted algae is allowed to mature naturally, and then it's harvested, so the young living plants are completely untouched. And this is why we really call Bone Strength Take Care our calcium with heart. So this is a 3-in-1 benefit. So you're getting bone health, joint health, as well as heart health in this formula. This is an easy to digest calcium from red mineral algae that your body can actually use and absorb. It's rich in over 70 different naturally occurring trace minerals that are absorbed from the water where it grows. And then New Chapter adds in the cofactors of 1,000 IU of a fermented whole food D3, as well as 45 micrograms of that K2, that MK7, that's critical for shuttling calcium to the bones where you need it and keeping it out of the arteries where you don't want it, right? Because that's what that buildup of plaque is. So this is a clinically researched algae for both bone and joint health. It's certified sustainable, and it's now USDA. This is really the purest, potent, most sustainable and science-backed algae that we could find. And that's why, of course, we call it the calcium with heart. So we have a couple different options of the Bone Strength Take Care. One is our original formula. This is an incredibly small, slim tab, really easy to digest. You're getting 900 milligrams of this bioavailable form of calcium. But we also have an even easier to swallow tiny tablet. Same calcium dosage. You do have to take 6 a day, but the pills are very small. This is excellent for people that really have a hard time swallowing pills. Most calcium tablets are really, really large because of the concentration of calcium in this algae. Both the original and the easy slim tab are very easy to swallow. And these are appropriate for ages 12 and above. So again, for those adolescents who are really trying to think about bone health now, this could also be an excellent option for them. So I just wanted to finish with a little image of our team back in Brattleboro and say thank you for joining today. You know, our commitment is to deliver products that are formulated for absorption that your body can actually use.
Thank you so much, Carina, for presenting that very informative presentation. That was great. And thank you everyone for attending today. And please be sure to subscribe to Natural Grocers channel and keep an eye out on, we have more guest presenter presentations coming up in the future weeks. Thank you again and good night.